happy to introduce John Halberstadt. He has served in many senior leadership positions and has integrated both the user experience and customer experience journeys. I can certainly say that by looking at his background, he has seen most of the challenges with metric-driven organizations. Besides serving as the vice president at Litspeed, he is also an active speaker and an educator. He also serves in the PMI North Nevada chapter as the Vice President of Professional Development. Thanks, John. We always look forward to that servant leadership demonstration here, examples. His topic today is about how we should be rethinking metrics. And I will let him dive deeper into all those discussions. Without any further delay, let me introduce John Halberstadt. John, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the kind introduction. Thank you all for being here today. Looking forward to this conversation, and I'm just going to jump right in the interest of time. We will have some time, I believe, for questions, so please add them here. And then I'll also be sharing my LinkedIn, so if we don't get time to cover things, if you just want to connect, I'm happy to connect to continue the conversation. I like to share. I'm always honored to be able to share with the community, but I also learn a lot from everyone, from folks like you. So thank you again for being here today, and we'll jump right in. So we'll try to take a subject that most people find kind of boring and problematic and turn it into something that's enjoyable. I really hope that within the next 55 minutes or so, you will get some ideas that you can take back in your day-to-day. This is really about things that you can use. I have a generalized allergy to theory. And so this is really just jumping right in. So got a QR code here. This is just for my LinkedIn profile. I promise you, I'm not trying to do a Bitcoin scam or anything with this. Promise. I won't rickroll you. It's really just my LinkedIn profile, but I'd love to connect if you'd like to continue the conversation. Thank you again for the wonderful introduction. I won't spend a whole lot of time talking about my background, but a little bit that's relevant for today's conversation, just very briefly. And thank you again. You alluded to it, but in 25, getting dangerously close to 30 years in technology throughout the SDLC or PDLC, close to 20 years of that in senior technical leadership roles. I'm not trying to impress you with my resume. I'm sure you all have equally, if not more, impressive resumes. But the reason that this matters is this is where I really understood that I had to really not only capture metrics, but I needed to have metrics that were really intelligible when I'm talking with the CIO, with the CEO, COO, CFOs especially. They're going to want to have metrics about things that matter to them. And so we'll talk about not getting rid of the metrics we use today, but additional sets of metrics that will help us really articulate the things that matter to everybody who are our customers and stakeholders. Also, I promise also, I'm not just trying to use the hype engine that is generative AI. So what I do in all of my conversations like this today is to weave in very, very specific tactical approaches. How can generative AI help in some of these areas where we could use some help? So getting past all the hype and all of the fear and all the bluster, I'll give you some examples that you can use, like in less than an hour, you can start using some of these things. A lot of that is informed by my background working for an AI company and natural language processing company for about 6 years. So from there, let's just jump right in. So we'll talk about the problem with traditional technical metrics. I generate talks like this for things that I wish I saw, heard, learned elsewhere. So it's a learning journey for me as well, but I know there's a problem here. And so I really wanted to generate something that articulated what I hear from so many of the folks that I've worked with and the teams that I've inherited in many cases that use technical metrics, and they're just not resonant to the people they work with. We'll talk about business aligned technical KPIs. Again, we're not getting rid of the metrics we use, but how can we look at additional complementary metrics or reframing metrics in a way that they're going to be more useful to those in the ecosystem of the work that we do. Again, I have a generalized allergy to things that are theoretical. I've been through a number of these sessions. Many of you perhaps have as well. where you walk away going, that sounds really interesting and I have no idea what to do. Like compare it to cotton candy. If you think you're eating something of substance and it dissolves on contact. I want to give you ideas. Even if they're not the ideas that you'll use exactly, it'll give you a jumping off point, some ideas that you can use so that you actually can see this hour as an investment of your time and you can actually get started with this. And then conclusion and Q&A. So with that, context and objectives, the traditional metrics that we generally use, and not just Agile, Lean, and DevOps, but most technical metrics, they're about technical performance. And again, it's not that that's bad, it's just not enough. They don't resonate with business stakeholders or demonstrate that business impact. And that disconnect, it just means that we're often rowing in different directions in the same boat. And we know that doesn't end well, especially in a literal boat, but figuratively, it doesn't end any better. So today's objectives talk about some new approaches that connect technical KPIs to business goals. Ensure that we've got that alignment so that everybody can see why we're tracking what we're tracking and how it helps the bottom line. And then again, provide those practical tools so that you can walk out of here with some things that you can use immediately. That sounds good. We talked about this in our preview session, I think yesterday or the day before. I include a but wait slide anytime I talk about metrics, and this is really important, and this may resonate with any of you, probably all of you. But when you start using metrics or changing them, some bad things sometimes can happen in any organization. It has nothing to do with technology, it has nothing to do with a specific org, but people like to game or cheat the metrics. They're a mirror. You want greater velocity, double your estimates. Done. You haven't changed anything. So don't game or cheat the metrics. Don't ever allow metrics to be weaponized against the team or team members. So if you start tracking new metrics and they don't look like you'd like them to look, that's an opportunity to see what we can do differently, but they should never be used against people. I'm not a fan of stretch goals. Some people are. I just simply think that they're demoralizing. So if you are going to set goals that are reasonable, and I'll talk a little bit more about things I'd suggest in the do's very quickly, but never forget the context. Again, if things are really bad when you start tracking some of these metrics, that's your starting point. And that context matters. So if your systems are up 90% of the time, 5 nines or 9 nines as a percentage uptime ratio is not going to be realistic. Don't ever forget the context in any of the numbers. Some things that I would suggest you do, and not just with what I'm talking about today, but any responsible use of metrics from my ever so humble but very strongly held opinion. Start with an understanding of what's known or suspected to be an area where we need improvement. So we can measure an immeasurable number of things, but what are the things that matter most? If you have a suspicion, that's a good place to start of an area that we need to improve. I'll talk about this next one today, but this is something that may be new to some of you. It's very new to many teams that I start working with. Have counterbalancing metrics so that you can't raise one and lower another one at the same time. So we can increase our throughput if we if we don't care about bugs, for example. That's not a good balance. So I'll talk about some ways to balance it so that you can look at a more holistic way of measuring something where you're not having people just trying to hit one single number at the expense of other things that matter. Always set realistic and valuable goals to metric improvements, but baseline first. So when we start talking about this stuff, I always tell people who start, well, we want to be at, again, 5 nines, or we want to have CSAT, we want an NPS of 80. What's your NPS today? Negative 17? You may not want to do that. So baseline the metrics and then propose some goals. So those are my do's and don'ts. I strongly held just from an ethical perspective, use metrics responsibly, and they'll be very helpful for us. So we talked a little bit about this. I'm going to go in just a small bit of detail, but since you're all here, you probably already know this intuitively, if not more so. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time selling you on the problem with current metrics that you probably already know. The first is that agile metrics like velocity, sprint burnout, and team capacity, again, they matter. But if I talk to an executive or my CFO or business stakeholders, business product. When I'm talking to different folks outside of the technology realm, these are not meaningful metrics to them. They still matter to us. They're an internal diagnostic. DevOps metrics, even more so. These are really important metrics, and I know I'm repeating myself, but intentionally. We're not getting rid of these, but these are not metrics. These are internal metrics. They're not metrics that talk about value directly. And then tech debt metrics as well. Again, all of these are really important diagnostics for us to understand how we're performing, but they are not sufficient in terms, or even useful or usable in the context of business. These metrics measure activity rather than outcomes, and that's one of the first problems, right? If we're in a business context, or even for nonprofits, we still have outcomes that we need to achieve. Activity matters, but outcomes is what we need to measure. We're not talking in any of those metrics that I just talked about, or any of the other ones that you're probably tracking today. They don't translate to business value or customer impact. They also create the potential, again, not consciously, right, but unconsciously, they create the potential for local optimization. So I can have greater velocity, but that doesn't necessarily change a lot of other things that are happening in terms of outcomes. So again, they're important, but if we optimize one element of the whole and not the entire system, it is a waste. And they often incentivize, again, the wrong behaviors. I talked about velocity. That's only half a joke, because the joke originated, I think, at least from my experience, decade and a half or so ago, maybe close to 2 decades, seeing people say, oh, well, I can just vote for this one, and yeah, this 3 is a 5, or this 5 is an 8, or this 3 is a 13. Hey, our velocity just doubled. Yeah, that's not a good behavior, but it's easier to get away with story points. I know we're laughing and crying at the same time, but we're laughing and crying because we've all seen it, right? So let's avoid that. Here's a real world example of, and there are unfortunately many of these, but Etsy and their deployment frequency paradox, right? So they celebrated high deployment frequency, 50 deployments per day, right? And despite the technical excellence, and you're welcome, by the way, I try to have a picture of a kitten crying in every one of my presentations. This is the only one that I have in this one. So this is the slide that you should remember. But joking aside, they celebrated something that indeed was important. We want to be able to deploy whenever we want to on demand. But if what we're delivering isn't really impacting the bottom line positively, if customers don't use or care about, or if it's not valuable what we're deploying, what's the point? We have engineering excellence, but if the product doesn't benefit, if our customers of that product don't like what we're deploying, then that metric is not useful for anybody outside the delivery team. So again, celebrate it on the delivery team. Like, I love the idea of doing 50 deployments a day. But if we're going to do 50 deployments, let's make sure that those 50 deployments are things that are of value to the customer. So how do we align technical KPIs to business outcomes? My suggestion is a balanced approach. So I've been accused, and rightfully so, of overusing the word holistic, but I like it, and I think it's a good way to think about the work that we do, especially when we talk about metrics, because they can be gamed, they can be misused, like I'd mentioned on that prior slide. So when I set out to build this presentation for today's conversation, it was really about how do we have a way that is going to be easy to implement, but that is holistic and business focused without getting rid of any of the good things we do today. And so a holistic approach to me is that technical excellence, again, is necessary, but not sufficient. So this is not an either or, this is not some, WWE grudge match, this versus that. It's like a Reese's peanut butter cup. Let's bring all the good stuff together and make it better than either individually. We need to connect that technical performance to business outcomes. And I'm a Bay Area guy for most of my life. I grew up in the Silicon Valley, so I'm going to have to put a Bay Bridge picture and everything as well. But creating a metrics bridge brings those worlds together again. So it's not that we have to choose either or. How do we bring them together in a way that works for everybody? So here are some suggestions. We can look at some other metrics that we can use combined with or existing technical KPIs I don't know that I would officially call CSAT scores technical KPIs, but we can talk about feature-specific customer satisfaction scores, technical quality, impact on net promoter score. We can still use the technical lens for some of these tools that are traditionally used for other aspects of measuring customer satisfaction. Feature adoption rates, those are things that we can track technically. Back to that Etsy example, if we were tracking new features that were deployed and seeing that we were deploying a lot, but they weren't used a whole lot, or they lowered our scores, that's a good way to start seeing that we need to really use those metrics together. But here's a couple of ideas. Again, we'll share these slides with you. I know I'm going through this quickly in the interest of time, but all of these are real world things that you can look at and see if they apply to your context. And if they do, you can start measuring them. But feature adoption rates are some that we can use today. Cost of delay, for those of you who are familiar with WSGIF and Scaled Agile or similar constructs, you're familiar with the idea of cost of delay. I got a heart for WSGIF, so thank you. We're kindred spirits, whoever did that. I don't know what that says about us as people, but we're amongst our tribe, so there we go. But for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is certain things need to be done with a sense of urgency. Certain things can wait, but that is a key element that's often not thought of. Revenue per feature, I mean, that's a really key one that we can look at. So those are just, this is a subset. We'll be sharing all of this, but these are some ideas that you can work with. That may apply to your context in terms of technical KPIs that are customer focused. But I'm going to go through some specific examples after I give you another case study that you might find interesting. That's a positive example. And if you want to see more on this, the actual blog that's there was a really interesting story. I really like how they did it. I don't love everything that Intuit does, but I really thought this was a great idea. So they connected technical metrics to customer usage patterns. They used direct customer observation. That's the follow me home. The title sounds creepy, but I think the idea is really good, which is go to the Gemba for those who are familiar with Lean, right? So we want to really see a day in the life of our customer and how they use our products. And doing that, they had a result of a 20% increase in feature adoption and customer satisfaction. Now, those are the types of metrics that can be really incredibly valuable for everybody involved from a technical perspective, but from a business outcome. So again, I build these presentations for people like us. Again, we are our tribe here, right? I got a heart for WSGIF, so you are my people. So what I like to have, and I hope this is valuable for you, I have 4 scenarios that I believe are fairly common business needs or business opportunities. These may not be, any of these 4 may not be 100% applicable for you and your context, but I think between these 4, you'll find some things that likely could be close to your context. So it'll get you maybe 50, 75% of the way there, if not all the way there. So hope these are helpful, but these are real world with some real world ideas on how to get started with some metrics for specific scenarios or needs. And the first is improving customer service level quality. So, back before I had silly titles and all of that stuff, I started my career as a technical support manager way long time ago. But I did learn at that time, because my work was customer focused, and I was talking to customers on the line all of the time, that I needed metrics that weren't just counting how many calls I got. I needed some other metrics about the quality of the service that I and my team were providing. And that stuck with me. I think that's part of why I know that I need metrics, even if I don't always like them, and that I need metrics that I could share with the president of the company, which I did at the time, and that they made sense to him, which they did. So many customer service organizations or, customer tech support teams, anybody who is providing that service, whether it's technical or non-technical, can be challenged with both establishing and maintaining a high level of efficiency and effectiveness. So what can we use in terms of metrics? And so again, I talked about counterbalancing metrics. Maybe you don't need to use all 4 of these, but in each of these examples, 4 examples, but for each example, I'm going to give you 4 metrics that you can use to counterbalance. The first is mean time to resolution. This is a metric that most tech support teams will use today. How long did it take to resolve customer issues? There's different ways to slice and dice it, but that's a key metric. So here is an example of how, if we don't use these scores together, they can be gamified. And again, this is where I started my career. So I've seen a lot of people who can lower the resolution time. I can lower the resolution time really quickly. And I've seen people do this, and I've had people do it to me, which is, hey, we've resolved your issue. Your login access has now been reinstated. Give us a call if there's any problems. I'm closing the ticket. Goodbye. Now, they didn't actually confirm with me. So in that instance, the mean time to resolution would go down. But if you actually asked me my satisfaction, I would say I am not satisfied with that response. I expect good tech support to validate with me before the closure of a ticket that my access actually was established. But that is a counterbalancing, just those two things. I also can spend 5 hours with every customer. Sorry, I'm pointing towards the slice of the circle on the monitor up here. But I can also, if I go and I try to address the CSAT score, I want greater customer satisfaction, I'm going to increase that 30%. Well, do I do that by spending 5 hours on the phone with everybody for a password reset? They may love that. We could have great conversations in 5 hours about anything. But the mean time to resolution then would go up dramatically. That's just one example, but be thinking about that. What if I raise this one metric that's important, how do I make sure that it's not having a negative impact in response for another metric? So those are 2 of them, but I use these 2 examples to start with because if you can wrap your head around those 2, and I think those are pretty intuitive, the rest of these will probably logically make sense to you. And again, in your context, replace these with other ones that matter, but make sure there's counterbalancing. First, contact resolution rate. So how many items are resolved on the first contact? From a customer perspective, the more that we can solve stuff quickly, but also on the first contact matters. And you can start to see, even on this one, first contact resolution versus the average time to resolution versus customer satisfaction. All of these are counterbalancing one another. And then the last one is customer retention rate. So all 4 of these are really interdependent. If I pull the thread on one at the expense of others, then I'm probably doing something within my team in terms of trying to optimize the situation that isn't the right way to address it. So this is a good way to make sure that we don't inadvertently, or in some cases, unfortunately, even consciously, knowingly do something to increase one. This is a way to make sure that we don't do the wrong thing when we measure those metrics. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. I think there's some, let's see if there's anything in the chat. I'm not seeing anything so far, so we'll keep going. Thank you. I wanted, as I'd mentioned, I'm throwing in some generative AI examples. Just if these scenarios, if that one in particular is one that you're experiencing today, I wanted to do a couple of other things very quickly to get you started with using this data to get you started to also address the problem. So here's a sample prompt. I have a sample prompt for each of these 4 scenarios that you can use, and I'll show you what you get back. So in this particular instance, if this is an area, that scenario that we just talked about, if that's problematic in your organization right now, here's a sample prompt that you can use. As a support process analyst, analyze our customer support data to identify common issues and suggest improvements to our support process, provide recommendations for reducing response times and increasing first call response rates, present this in the form of a structured report with actionable insights. And I'm using Perplexity here. In all of my talks, I bounce around from different AI tools because all of them have their pros and cons, but whichever one you're most comfortable with, those prompts will work just fine. But again, if that's a scenario, I've given you some ideas for some metrics, but I also wanted to give you some ideas. If this is your real world, here's a way to not just say we need to measure these things, but here are some things that we should start working on in terms of addressing that problem, right? Because the other thing about metrics is we don't want metrics to just tell us that things aren't great. We want metrics, and if they say that things aren't great, why do we care? Because we want to take action to take those things that aren't great and make them great. So here's some ideas on how you can move forward on each of these. And I hope this is helpful to at least some of you, hopefully to all of you, in terms of not just tracking these metrics, but knowing we track metrics to know where we are, but really to know where and how we need to act and with most priority. So that is an example response. Again, you'll get a copy of this artifact as well to use, as well as the prompt, so you can put that in your generative AI tool with your own context as much as you'd like. So the next, how about increasing revenue with new features? So we just talked about that Etsy real world example. They're pushing out a lot of features. Doesn't seem like customers were liking the features. So how do we make sure that the work that we're doing, even though it's technically excellent, what can we do to make sure that we are providing things that our customers want while maintaining technical excellence? So this is something that we can capture technically, and it is a technical metric that is also a very important business metric, which is feature adoption rate. So maybe in your organization, this may be difficult depending on your tech stack and your tooling, but to the extent that you're able to track this, your feature adoption rate, percentage of users that are actively using those new features, revenue per feature. So, and if you're in a nonprofit, there's similar constructs. It doesn't have to be revenue per feature. If you have donors or there's other things related to the mission that you can do. So even for a nonprofit, sorry, you're not off the hook. We all have ways to make sure that we're doing the right thing in terms of the impact of the development that we're working on. So, but revenue per feature, as we're delivering new work, we're going to be able to track that information about binding information for the revenue that's being generated from customers for the feature that it has that we've built and developed for that particular solution. Customer retention rate. So this one gets a little bit interesting because customer retention can be tricky for a lot of reasons. They may love your product, but they may have other reasons they don't like the organization or pricing or other things that are outside of technical control. But again, this is only one of 4 metrics. So it is something that we can look at in the aggregate as part of the counterbalancing. And then net promoter score. If we want to be able to take a look at how much customers like the product, the real arbiter of that is, would they recommend it? If those of you are familiar with the NPS, those who would recommend the product or service to a family member or friend. And it's a scale that has its own sort of construct. So it's a pretty tough system. It only gives you credit as a positive fan. Willingness to recommend, I think, is 7 through 9. So the rest of the scale is either neutral or net negative. So it's a tough scale to work with, but it's a very common metric. But again, they're all counterbalancing so that we can't raise one metric. Feature adoption rate, for example, I always joke about having an ATM that will just spit out 20s regardless of how much is in your account. People would adopt that feature very dramatically and they'd be very happy, but we'd have some other problems. Revenue per feature would be a net negative and those sorts of things. So, but that's an idea in terms of if you want to look at increasing revenue with new features. Again, it's not just how quickly we deploy, but other information that we can capture about how the impact was to the organization of that new feature. So if that's an area that your organization wants to start looking into and improving, here's a sample prompt. Assuming the role of a product analyst, analyze customer feedback and usage patterns to identify which features are most valuable to our users. Generate a report highlighting opportunities to enhance these features and increase adoption rates. Include case studies of successful feature enhancements and their impact on revenue. And so the sample response here. Now, again, this one, I didn't have real world data. So when you do this, by the way, whatever tool you're using, it's generally hidden, but if you're going to use this, turn off the option about improve this model, make it better for everybody. What that means is that they're going to use proprietary data in the model. So make sure you turn that off. It's turned on by default, at least it was the last time I checked, in Perplexity, Claude, ChatGPT. I don't know about all the other ones, but just make sure before you put in this sort of information that you want to make sure that it's not included in building in the model. When that's done though, using your information, you will get some very specific, this is a sample obviously, but you'll get some very specific information about the usage in some areas that you could potentially improve, the parts of your product that people like and want more of, and then the areas that people don't like that maybe you can improve so that they will use it more often. But also with an eye on what are the things that customers want most that will have them use the product more or more effectively, more consistently, et cetera. Those are the things that we really want. We want the right type of usage of that product. And we really want to focus on the things that matter as far as improving those outcomes. How about enhancing operational efficiency? So I think this applies to 100% of people all of the time. I have yet to go into an organization where we say, you know, we're completely tuned and efficient, and all of our practices and our processes are working great. If any of you work at the organization that is the exception to that, please let me know if you have any openings, because that sounds dreamy. But until then, I will continue doing what I do and try to help folks in these organizations with operational efficiency. So again, if we want to improve operational efficiency, there are things that we obviously can do to help make our people be more efficient. But one of the first things is, what's our automation coverage? Now, we know, especially today, with a lot of the, not just generative AI tools, I would just say more broadly, AI in general, not generative AI. There are a lot of tools that can help with, process optimization, RPA, those sorts of things. So what percentage of processes do we have that are automated? Cost savings. So again, same idea about counterbalancing metrics. I can automate everything, and that's always a danger for people who like to automate things. Not everything is worth, not, okay, I get one hard and I got a big laugh, but you know what I mean, right? I mean, it's like, I will write unit tests for code that nobody ever actually uses. I will automate processes that happen once a year for one person. So when we talk about cost savings, that's a counterbalancing. I don't want to automate everything, but I want to automate the things that are going to give me the biggest lift in terms of cost savings. So there, right there, I've got two things that I can work with. Error rate reduction. Well, I can automate everything if I don't care about the quality. As long as you're okay with a 0% completion rate, my error rate is 100%, but my automation coverage is also 100%. Though that is semi-jokingly, like that's what we're trying to avoid, right? Like that's why we need counterbalancing metrics. And then time savings and process execution. And I would say in the aggregate as well. So when I look at time savings, if a process takes, let's just say 16 person hours, is it 16 person hours per person per week, per month, per whatever? A 1 minute time saving and process execution for a process that's performed hundreds of thousands of times a day is a good improvement if you can cut a minute off of that. So that's something I would say, just to be a little bit more precise. When I think about time savings, we want to look at the aggregate amount of time that particular process takes. And that is, how long does it take, but how often is that process done? And there's some simple math there, but that's really what we're looking at. If a process takes you a month, but it's one person and it happens once a year, I probably would say that's probably okay. Maybe not ideal, but it's probably not the biggest value. And I've seen a couple of notes, and I'll try to pick those up later just to make sure I keep on track, but I think we'll have some time.
Yep.
So sample prompt, act as an automation specialist, identify repetitive tasks in our operational workflows and suggest ways to automate them. And I added using available tools and technologies. A lot of the thing that I'll find if you're not explicit with the generative AI tools is that they will suggest tools that you have to buy. I really just say, here's what we've got. So if you're using the Microsoft stack or whatever, if you've got other tools, that's great, but I like to just say work with the tooling that we have in most instances, so you don't have additional barriers about what you use for tooling. Provide a cost benefit analysis for each automation opportunity and present this in the form of a detailed proposal with recommendations for implementation. And by the way, on all of these are all real screen captures. Those are real prompts, and I put them in, and you can sort of see the residue at the top. And this is the first output. You can see also, by the way, and I just should probably caveat this for those of you who have not experienced this yet, and that may not actually be anybody at this point in time. Hallucinations are still real, so double check math, double check references. One of the reasons I use Perplexity is that it will do citations for things, but even it, like in this sad but true, like Metallica said, right? But if you look at this example here, I did not provide it any details other than that prompt, and I asked it to do a scenario, and it came up with some realistic sounding, like, okay, it costs 15 to 30 grand and it's going to save me. That's awesome, except I gave it 0 starting point. So just be careful with those metrics. Don't just copy and paste this into a PowerPoint and send it to the CFO or whatever. Like, that won't end well. But this is a really good place to start, though, especially as you do add your own context. How about this one? Being more innovative. A lot of people talk about this organizationally. It means a lot of different things to a lot of people. But if we really are a product organization, or if we're a company that is trying to break out of the doldrums, maybe we're not a product organization, maybe it's only internal customers. Hey, even if we have internal customers, we still have to be innovative, right? We still have customers, and we still want to build the best useful, usable, impactful to the organization solutions. And we have to be more innovative in many cases. It actually is sometimes more important for internal organizations than some of the companies that we would think of in terms of startups or those sorts of companies that you would see in social media and similar. So this can be really important for a lot of where I spend my time, which is generally with financial services organizations that are fairly large organizations. Innovation is important for all of us. So if this is a need that you have today, what can we do? So innovation pipeline growth. So the number of new ideas or projects initiated based on market insights from a technical perspective. Product MVP, MMP launch rate. So the success rate of new product launches. So if we want to be innovative, that's a metric that we can track at our team level. And if you're not using MMPs or MVPs, this is something I would highly suggest as well. We really want to get this idea of delivering small, minimum marketable products out there and getting some feedback on them. That revenue growth from new products, and then CSAT for new features. And so again, that's a combination of some business metrics and some technical metrics together. You can't just do CSAT across the board, but CSAT combined specifically or focused on those new features will say, for example, I'm still really happy with your product, but the new feature that you just added on my Alexa smart TV that pushes advertisements to me all of the time while I think it's in screensaver mode is not a feature that I like. I think they probably know that people don't like that, but those are the sorts of things that we can use the combination of technical and business metrics at the same time. We will provide that information about the new features and the usage of that by our customers, and then track that, have the ability really in most cases technically to pass the CSAT questions to the customer and then capture that at the feature level, not just the product level. So if that's an area that you're working on or want to work on, here's a sample prompt to consider. Assume the role of a market analyst. Analyze current market trends in our industry, and again, provide your specific industry, and identify emerging opportunities for growth. I would also say, by the way, in this prompt, this is fairly generic. The more specific you are, the better the results are going to be. So our industry isn't financial services, it's regional credit unions on the West Coast would be a more specific example. Get as specific as you can, the quality of the answers and the level of precision is going to improve. Generate a strategic report outlining potential innovations and their feasibility based on market demand and competition. Include recommendations for resource allocation and timelines for implementation. And as you can see, if you look closely in the example, I tweaked my second response based on what I had just said and said regional nonprofit credit unions. So if you see in the executive summary, it included that. And the reason that I just mentioned about being specific about that context is if you look at the current market net landscape, it doesn't just talk about financial services industry and automation, et cetera. It talks about that legacy core banking systems are a significant obstacle. There's some information specific about members, which can be different than what you'd have in a Chase, JP Morgan Chase, or other non-regional credit unions, et cetera. But that level of precision will give us some information about what we may want to do if we want to start addressing that issue and look for opportunities. So those are some good examples. I will take a look at those pretty quickly. I think we'll have enough time for some questions. Thank you again for the chat. Some practical implementation techniques. So getting started with getting started. Identify what business impact or outcomes are most important. Start with just 1 to 2 metrics that connect that technical work to business outcomes. Focus on metrics that are easy to collect and understand. And ensure that an approach has been defined about how to implement the metrics, both technically and procedurally. We really want to look at current metrics to identify gaps in alignment with business objectives. For those who aren't familiar with SMART goals, I see some reference to OKRs, so I'm looking forward to that. I just did a talk about OKRs at the PMI Global Conference last year, so I geek out on OKRs as well, and I don't know if I'm gonna get a heart for that like I did for WSGIF, but I feel like thank you, whoever did that. But I geek out on basically any awkward acronym is my place to be. But SMART goals that connect technical performance to strategic priorities. So we really do want to have some SMART goals or OKRs. Create simple dashboards that show both technical and business metrics. Having them in one spot can be really helpful. But again, the key word being simple. We don't have time to talk about what I think makes a good dashboard, and I'd love to hear what all of you think makes a good dashboard. What I will say is if you have to scroll on a dashboard too far, it's not really a dashboard, it's a report. So create simple dashboards, and if you're not sure if it's simple enough, put it in front of your CFO and just read their body language and you'll know if you got it. And use generative AI to help interpret and communicate the business impact. So really generative AI tool, again, past all the hype and fear mongering, is really helpful in a lot of these scenarios to help refine an idea or to work with some data that you've got to help you see information in that data in a way that you can start seeing where might you want to focus your metrics. If those 4 scenarios I gave you weren't sufficient, then take your context and use generative AI also to help, what 4 counterbalancing metrics would be good for this scenario I have. Here's my data, here's my context. It'll come up with some suggestions. I would also just suggest as a aside, ask it for 8 and then choose the top 4. That's the other thing I found is that if you ask for a little bit more, then you can be the curator of that and you'll get some good thoughts. So, with that, conclusion and QA. So the key takeaways: start small, experiment, and iterate. Focus on metrics that directly connect to current opportunities. Ensure that there's collaboration with technical and business leaders and stakeholders to prioritize. There's a danger, I'm sure not with any of you, but with everyone else that I've worked with in the past. Not everybody, this is being recorded. Everybody other than those of you that I've worked with who are watching this recording, where it's with the best of intents, we want to run fast. So those of us on the technical side we'll start building these things because we think we know what the business need or opportunity is. This really needs to be collaborative. Back to my Reese's peanut butter cup reference. And if you don't like that, you can use Lincoln Park or whatever other analogy you'd like for two things that are different working together. And hopefully somebody gives me a heart for the Lincoln Park joke. Ensure counterbalancing metrics to assure that holistic view. And I think that that's really important. And you can just get started today. Thank you. I hope that was for Lincoln Park. It might also be the holistic view. I'll take the heart regardless of what it was for. I also have to have this owl slide in all of my conversations where possible. So thank you for that.
First of all, really great presentation. Really liked, the way you were trying to begin, building the story here. One of the things that I remember from the agile principles is, business people and technical people should work together on a constant basis. Yeah, they say daily and stuff like that, but on a frequent basis. That's something that is really important in order to bring the story together. What's the story you are telling at the end of the metric? Like, yeah, XYZ, we increased 20%. So what's the story are you telling? That's what you're trying to bring together. I really appreciate that. There are lots of questions. I'm going to keep my questions straight to you. I'll serve those questions one at a time.
Yeah.
Jorge has a question in terms of are there
Baselines.
any baselines or market standards to compare our metrics against the market?
Um, sorry, I always make my consultant joke when I hear this, so forgive me, sort of. But like lawyers and consultants always say, it depends, and the answer is it depends. Joking aside, it does depend on what your market is. And so you can, Perplexity actually is a good tool for that. There's other ones to get some baseline metrics in particular ways. It would also depend on, even for your industry, what context. So if it's, for example, NPS, which you can argue is or isn't a technical score. I mean, it is a customer satisfaction rating, but it can be used for applying technical aspects of like tech support or other service that's provided. Those you can often find online, or at least for large companies. You can see some of those numbers. Most companies won't share them. The other thing I would just caution, and thank you for the question. The reason that I know is that I've gone down that same path and said, I want to actually get some baselines. I was asked to get some baselines on quality for an organization. And the reality is nobody wants to talk about that unless their results are perfect. So the problem with baselines is people are generally unlikely to share, even individual organizations, some of their metrics for proprietary reasons. Either they're good, they're bad, they're a competitive element that they don't want to share. It's confidential. But the other problem, and I guess this is a really long way of saying you can get a little bit of it, but the data may not be as useful as you'd like, is if you can use it as a reference. So you can say Amazon is able to deploy X number of times a day. What you won't get is a broader study. There may be some studies out there. I'm not aware of any offhand, though, that will give you that data in the aggregate. So comparing yourself against a particular company, I think, is also kind of dangerous. I will close by answering a question you didn't ask, which is the way that I like to think about it is the way that I like to think about most metrics, which is I want to compare my organization, my team, my whatever metric to where I was previously and where I want to be. It's best used as a mirror. And we're, being able to compare against yourself. There may be some other instances. I hope that that's helpful. Happy to continue that conversation if you'd like on LinkedIn or elsewhere. Just in the interest of time, I should probably move on, but thank you for the question.
Absolutely. That's a
And then
wonderful
have a
one.
sense of measure unavailability time, app not available. Yeah, that's a great, Jorge, great follow-on question as well. So if I understand the question right, that would be another great metric, which would be, just say off the top of my head, counterbalancing downtime, downtime and revenue generation. The more that you could bind it to that particular product, and in some cases even bind it to a particular part of the product journey. So if it's a shopping cart, overly simplified example, but how many sales did we lose in that time period? There's ways to connect some of those, and I think that's a great. So unavailability time and impact. from a, if it's revenue or new customers, what is the metric that we assume is going to be negatively impacted? Customer satisfaction would certainly be one if we're not available. Customer retention would be another one. So when the app is unavailable for long enough, I've had this happen, unfortunately, with some of my products in the past. When we had stability problems with the platform, some customers just chose, I mean, people have other options unless you're the IRS. So that one, they wait as long as you have to. But for most people, you don't have, I mean, for most people, they've got a choice to choose between, what you have today. And so that is a metric that matters, customer retention, and then some other, great question as well. Is it Indu? Oh, moved away from KPIs to OKRs. I really wanted to answer this question, and I will. And I will try to not get on my soapbox too much, but again, I geek out on WSGIF and OKRs. I don't know what that says about me as a person, but I'm glad I'm among my people. My thought on KPIs versus OKRs is they're complementary to one another. And I did a talk on this. You don't have to sit through the whole thing, but I have one slide that I can share as well if it's useful. But KPIs to me are they are a health metric, and they are something that, I mean, that key performance indicators, like how is this thing behaving? I compare it to my heart rate, my blood pressure, what my weight, whatever other things there are things that we measure in your car. You've got a speedometer, you've got an oil gauge, you've got a whatever else. Those to me are like KPIs. They're things that point at different aspects of a system to say, how is that system behaving? They're absolutely essential, and especially from a technical perspective, we should be monitoring those things. Hard stop. What I suggest to people is, so I've got all these KPIs. If I'm looking at my KPIs, and I always use the 5 nines example because I did a lot of technical operations. So if that doesn't mean anything to anyone here, before the days of all of the cloud availability and all the things you could do, the gold standard for system uptime was 99.999% of the time your systems were up during performance hours. And so that's the example that I use. If my KPI is uptime, my KPI is uptime. My KPI at that point is, maybe I want my KPI to be 99, but what I'm measuring is system uptime. If my system uptime is 90%, I set an OKR. So I use a KPI that I don't like the current value of as a jumping off point to establish an OKR. The OKR then is my objective is to improve my overall system availability. My key result is that I will have system uptime of 99.999. Actually, that's an unrealistic goal. Like I said earlier, it would be 96 by the end of Q2 2025. And then the next quarter, I would increase it by whatever percentage. That's how I treat KPIs. I treat them, there's a lot of them, and they're important. But when I don't like what those numbers are, that becomes what is the goal of the OKR. And so that's how I generally connect them. Having OKRs that are not connected to KPIs honestly doesn't make sense to me. And having KPIs that are bad and not setting OKRs also doesn't make sense to me. So back to my Lincoln Park, Reese's Peanut Butter Cup, PB&J, whatever analogy you like, when things come together, let's use that. Any last questions, thoughts?
Don't think there are any last questions at this point.
I missed one of Jorge's. Maintenance cost versus cost reduction. Sometimes automation maintenance is nice. Jorge, absolutely agree. And that may have come in before I had said anything. What I was going to say was that's the counterbalancing metric. And I love the idea of counterbalancing of the expense of automation. I think on the slide, I had a similar metric as far as a counterbalance, which was the amount of time saved or something like that. You could go directly to the cost of that as another counterbalancing metric, but I completely agree. Not just for regression test automation or for process automation. I think it applies across the board. Unit test coverage, whatever that is, it's really easy to start going down the efficiency and automation path, but not everything is cost effective to automate. So again, focus on the things that provide the most financial or efficiency impact, and that is how much time in the aggregate did it take away, and was it worth the cost? So anyway, with that, I think we are at time. Thank you all so much. This was wonderful. Thank you all so much. It was an honor to have an hour with you today. Happy to connect. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope this was useful and helpful for you all.
Definitely. Thanks a lot, John, for your wonderful presentation. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
As we conclude, measure what matters.
Absolutely. Thank you, my friend. Take care. We will talk.
Take care. Bye-bye.